The new book by Robin Phillips, Confessions of a Recovering Gnostic, is one that every believer should have on their bookshelf. It offers mature metaphysical reflections on a number of themes very pertinent to our walks as believers. But what exactly was Gnosticism? I'll let Robin Phillips explain. Gnosticism describes a family of ancient heresies revolving around the idea that the material world is a result of a cosmic blunder, the product of an inferior deity. Accordingly, salvation does not involve liberation from sin and death, but escape from the inherently bad material world. Our goal, these teachers taught, is to attain to a spirituality liberated from the trappings of time, matter, and space. To achieve such liberation, it is necessary to attain to a hidden esoteric knowledge, gnosis in Greek. In their retelling of gospel story, Jesus came to the world beyond to give this secret gnosis to the chosen few. This secret knowledge revealed the way to awaken the divine spark within, so that enlightened ones could escape from imprisonment to enjoy a disembodied eternity. During Robin's studies in the early 21st century, sociologists of religion emphasized categories such as implicit theology and the social imaginary. And I'm quoting Robin now. What these concepts point towards is that the most influential ideas animating religious cultures can sometimes be ideas which are only tacitly articulated and which may even exist in tension to direct doctrinal formulations. Put another way, assumptions may often percolate slightly beneath the surface so that they color and modulate religious practice and thought, even if they are rarely encountered in a distilled form. Applied to the question of Gnosticism, he wonders whether there might be an implicit theology of Gnosticism lurking beneath the surface of much American Christianity, tincturing how believers think about their bodies, the purpose of salvation, the material world, and resurrection. To speak of the Christianity in our day being Gnostic, and I'm continuing to quote Robin here, it's the same way that we might talk about Oprah Winfrey having a Kantian-type dualism between faith and reason, meaning not that the popular talk show host spends her nights poring over the Critique, as a book of Kant, or struggling over breakfast with the synthetic a priori, other concept of Kant, but that her perspective on the disjunction between faith and reason is objectively similar to or correlated with key dualisms within the epistemology of Immanuel Kant. In this book, Robin talks about Christians that he has known that have actually burned their churches to symbolize that church doesn't have to be in a building. And Robin describes how the Rastafarians in California, which are technically a Gnostic sect, have very similar views about the body as many would-be Orthodox Christians, but they have been led astray by the recurring heresy of Gnosticism. Robin talks about David and Sophie, who started dating 7 months ago, and they've constantly talked about spiritual things. After the sudden death of a good friend of David, their conversations turned towards the next life. And when David happened to mention to his fiancée about his hope in physical resurrection, Sophie said, "You mean you actually believe we will have physical bodies in heaven?" "Of course," David replied. "Isn't that what all Christians believe?" "Well," replied Sophie, "in my 18 years as a believer, I've never encountered that idea. In fact, it even seems a little gross." Even though the Nicene Creed, it says that we hope for the resurrection of the dead, many Christians are ignorant on this ancient spiritual custom and doctrine of bodily resurrection. And when N.T. Wright came out few years ago and talked about the idea that we would have resurrected bodies, ABC News reported it as a departure from traditional Christian belief. So far has the shift gone in the direction of really a regurgitation of historic Gnosticism that sees the body as bad and that sees that Christ came to liberate us from material things. And Time magazine reported at the close of last century that 2/3 of Americans who say they believe in the resurrection of the dead, they do not believe they'll have bodies in the resurrection. And Robin reports that many pastors say their congregations are illiterate when it comes to the doctrine of future bodily resurrection. And they assume that salvation means liberation from the realm of time. Robin explains how when many contemporary Christians speak of Christ's saving work or Christ saving us, they think that it means Christ saving us from hell, when in reality, for first century Christians with a mindset of Jewish temple worship, Christ saving the world meant saving collectively the world, expanding the covenant of Israel out into all the world, similar to the way that in the ancient Near East, kings would establish their power by erecting images of them through their territory. That's what Christians are called to do. And the dominion mandate is really a cultural mandate. And Robin talks, it's a brilliant defense of the sacraments, and it's a brilliant defense of the physicality of being human and the goodness of being human. And Robin says that the demand that Christianity has on an intelligent carpenter is to make good tables. So even if you're dancing ballet, if you're doing it for the glory of God, that's inherently good, and that Christians shouldn't shy away from doing something they like just because maybe they have the idea that it is not spiritual, because it is spiritual, and we're participating in God's kingdom, and anything that's incomplete will be completed when Christ comes. Robin says that in wrestling with such questions, some believers have maintained that the most effective Christian witness occurs when we withdraw from the world. And this is very practical outworkings. This is very practical outworkings. And Robin says that many Christians feel that they shouldn't be involved in politics. He talks about a pastor he had when he was young, even going so far as saying it was a sin to vote. But Robin also remarks on this, that he says that the very idea that you can separate religion from politics is a post-Enlightenment innovation and came in the wake of cultural change that made it possible to begin talking about a political or religious space separate from the rest of life. And it's interesting to me because in the last couple episodes that Robin has done of the Robin and Boom Show with philosophy expert Dr. Phillips, they talked about this and how the new tradition after the Enlightenment, which scorned all traditions, was a new tradition that said tradition was bad. But this secularized society and this new spirituality that came about after the Enlightenment was really the eclipse of the Western religious tradition. So when Christians say that they shouldn't be involved in politics and we should just cede the world to the devil, this is them, in a sense, surrendering ground that the Enlightenment conquered in favor of a secular sphere. I think it's vital for Christians to get a handle on what it means to be human in this world. And years ago, I remember there was a Christian coffee shop in Redlands, California. It was run by a brother and sister that were Seventh-day Adventists. And I remember they wanted it to be a place where anybody could come, but it would particularly cater to Bible studies, to church conversation groups where you can meet other Christians, There were Christian themes all around, maybe Bibles on tables. It was a really good idea. I moved away from the area. I came back a couple months later, and I went in, and one of the girls that used to work there said, well, now she's volunteering because God revealed to the owner that it was really important to God to have money being exchanged, and it was like the money changers in the temple that Jesus ran out. Well, that coffee shop wasn't in business much longer because they couldn't sell coffee anymore. But how unfortunate that he couldn't have drawn from a rich tradition of Christians wrestling with these themes of being in the world but not of the world, and having really settled these ideas many centuries before. See, we need holy tradition if we're going to navigate our way in the world. And philosophy is about becoming better people, flourishing people. And these mature metaphysical reflections of Robin really have to be dealt with if we're going to be integrated spiritual beings. Is salvation something that happens to individuals only, or rather something that includes the restoration of the entire created order? What about the Pauline emphasis that the church be an emissary of new creation, advancing Christ's kingdom in the interval between its inauguration and culmination? The last part of the book admittedly is a bit philosophical, but is well worth it. I especially liked Robin's part about how the sacrament of the Lord's Supper comes from the Jewish Passover and the idea of liturgical participation. And I'd just like to read what Robin says about this. Jesus celebrated the Passover in the event we call the Last Supper, as the faithful Jews and Israelites had been doing for hundreds of years. Significantly, this occurred on the night before Jesus, the new Passover lamb, rescued Abraham's descendants from their final bondage. By mysteriously participating in the original Passover, Christ was able to transform the celebration in light of his own dawning victory over slavery and exile. Taking the Passover bread and wine, Christ declared that it was his body and blood. Robin says that many Christians have a hard time understanding this type of liturgical participation, and so they end up with weird theories, such as the theory held by many Protestants that communion is simply an illustration and nothing more. Robin says that once we come to terms with the goodness of the material world, a lot of church customs that before might not have made sense suddenly make sense. And I'd like to leave you with this quote from Plato that he gives, talking about the goodness of the material order. But of beauty, I repeat again, that we saw her there shining in company with the celestial forms, and coming to earth we find her here too, shining in clearness through the clearest aperture of sense. Confessions of a Recovering Gnostic. Get it.